Move, you worthless ghetto trash! Richard Sterling's hand cracks across Dorothy Washington's face. The elderly woman's coffee cup flies off the table, shattering on the floor. Every customer freezes. Phones emerge from pockets. Dorothy touches her burning cheek but doesn't cry. Her steady eyes meet Sterling's glare without fear. Something in her calm composure unsettles him. Sterling straightens his expensive tie, satisfied. But Dorothy Washington isn't nobody, the way other customers look at her with respect. Sterling has no idea what he's just set in motion. Because Dorothy has a son. And when Vincent Washington learns what happened to his mother today, Richard Sterling's comfortable world will begin to crumble in ways he never imagined possible. Have you ever watched someone destroy their future with one moment of pure arrogance? Dorothy Washington's morning routine never changed. 6:30 sharp, she rose from bed in her modest apartment, sunlight filtering through lace curtains she'd sewn herself 40 years ago. The space reflected a lifetime of careful choices. Family photos arranged precisely on the mantel, fresh flowers from her window garden, shelves lined with books that spoke of an educated mind. The photographs told deliberate stories. Dorothy in cap and gown, clutching her PhD in education. Dorothy with Samuel, her late husband, dancing at their anniversary celebration. And most prominently displayed, recent pictures of her son Vincent at formal dinners, charity galas, business conferences. Always impeccably dressed, always commanding respect from everyone around him. Her neighbors knew Vincent was successful. Very successful. Dorothy kept the details appropriately vague. Something in business, she'd say with maternal pride. Important meetings, significant responsibilities. The kind of work that required expensive suits and private cars. At precisely 8 o'clock, her phone rang. "Morning, Ma. Sleep well?" Vincent's voice carried the warmth reserved only for family. Dorothy smiled, settling into her favorite chair. "Like a baby, sweetheart. How's work treating you?" "Can't complain. Business is business. Do you have plans today?" "Lunch with Helen at Rosie's, our usual Tuesday tradition." A pause. Vincent always worried about her venturing out alone, though Dorothy never understood why. The neighborhood was perfectly safe, filled with people who'd known her for decades. "Ma, you know I could arrange something nicer. Private dining rooms, proper service staff, places more suited to someone of your standing." Dorothy chuckled. "Vincent Washington, I raised you better than that. Good people matter more than fancy places. Rosie's has both good food and good hearts." "Yes, ma'am. Just be careful out there, okay? People aren't always what they seem." "I'll be fine, baby. You worry too much about your old mother." "It's my job to worry. Love you, Ma." The call ended abruptly. Vincent never lingered on phones, even with family. Successful men operated on tight schedules, Dorothy understood. Important decisions waiting, crucial meetings demanding attention. Across the city, Richard Sterling's morning unfolded in stark contrast. His penthouse office occupied the entire 42nd floor of downtown's most prestigious tower. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered commanding views of the financial district sprawling below. Italian marble floors reflected light from crystal chandeliers. Leather furniture cost more than most families earned annually. Sterling stood at those windows like a general surveying conquered territory. His reflection stared back, perfectly styled hair, hand-tailored suit, gold Rolex catching morning light. Every detail calculated to project superiority, dominance, untouchable success. His assistant Jennifer approached hesitantly, knowing Sterling's moods could shift violently without warning. "Sir, your 10 o'clock appointment files are ready. Mrs. Carter also called requesting to reschedule her consultation." Sterling's expression darkened immediately. "Mrs. Carter? That woman with the thick accent who can barely string together coherent English sentences? Tell people like her to master basic communication before wasting my valuable time. Sir, she actually speaks 5 languages fluently and runs 3 successful tech companies. Her portfolio is quite impressive. I don't care if she runs 50 companies. Image matters in this profession, Jennifer. My reputation depends on maintaining appropriate clientele, the kind of people who belong in establishments like this, who understand quality and class. This was Sterling's carefully constructed universe. Success measured by how many people you could dismiss as inferior. Power defined by never considering anyone else's struggles, dreams, or basic humanity. He'd built his career defending wealthy corporations against discrimination lawsuits, ensuring the powerful remained untouchable while the vulnerable stayed crushed. His phone displayed news notifications, police brutality videos going viral, investigative reports exposing systemic racism in hiring practices, congressional hearings on hate crimes. Sterling scrolled past each story with practiced indifference. These problems belonged to other people, people whose existence he considered completely irrelevant to his continued prosperity. Meanwhile, Rosie's diner buzzed with preparation for another busy lunch service. Maria Santos had inherited the establishment from her father, continuing 3 decades of serving the neighborhood with genuine warmth. Construction workers grabbed quick breakfasts before job sites. Office employees escaped sterile corporate cafeterias for real conversation and homemade food. Elderly regulars who'd been coming since the doors first opened. Dorothy Washington reigned as unofficial neighborhood royalty. Every Tuesday at noon, she'd arrive with Helen Morrison from their church. Same corner booth, same gentle orders, same conversations that somehow made everyone nearby feel more peaceful. Maria always prepared specially. Table 6 was cleaned twice. Good china, fresh napkins, small flower arrangements. The respect wasn't calculated business strategy. It was earned through years of Dorothy's quiet kindness, her mysterious ability to solve impossible problems for struggling families. When Maria's father suffered his stroke, Dorothy organized meal deliveries and hospital visits. When the diner faced eviction from corporate developers, Dorothy somehow produced a lawyer who handled everything pro bono, asking no payment except the satisfaction of helping good people. Nobody questioned how Dorothy made these connections materialize. Her son Vincent must have developed quite an impressive network through his business success. In the corner booth, a well-dressed man sat reading financial newspapers, coffee growing cold while he quietly observed every person entering or leaving. Some professional habits never fade, regardless of official retirement from dangerous work. The collision began with something as simple as a bumped elbow. Dorothy had just settled into her favorite booth when Richard Sterling stormed through Rosie's front door like a man at war with the universe. His Armani suit wrinkled from the morning's frustrations, a parking ticket from some overzealous meter maid, construction delays that made him 20 minutes late, a coffee shop barista who'd clearly never learned proper customer service. Sterling surveyed the diner with barely concealed disgust. Cracked vinyl booths, laminated menus, the smell of grease and honest work hanging in the air. This wasn't his usual restaurant, but his preferred establishment had been booked solid. He'd have to endure slumming it with the common people. Maria Santos approached with professional courtesy despite sensing trouble brewing. "Good afternoon, sir. Table for one." "Obviously," Sterling snapped, not bothering to look at her. "Somewhere clean, if such a thing exists in this place, and I need it fast. I have important meetings this afternoon." Maria bit back her response, leading him to a table near Dorothy's booth. Sterling threw himself into the seat, immediately pulling out his phone to make his displeasure known to the world through a series of aggressive text messages. Dorothy sat peacefully with Helen, their conversation flowing like a gentle stream. Helen was describing her grandson's college acceptance when Dorothy reached for the sugar dispenser. Her elbow, moving with the careful precision of someone who'd learned to be mindful in small spaces, barely grazed Sterling's briefcase sitting on the adjacent table. The contact was feather-light, barely noticeable, but it was enough to knock over Sterling's oversized coffee cup. Brown liquid cascaded across his briefcase, seeping into the expensive leather and pooling around scattered legal documents. Sterling watched in horror as coffee soaked through contracts, depositions, case files that represented weeks of billable hours. "What the hell?" Sterling exploded, leaping to his feet. The entire diner fell silent. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Forks paused halfway to mouths. Every eye turned toward the unfolding drama. Dorothy immediately began reaching for napkins. "Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry. Let me help you clean that up." But Sterling was beyond reason. The morning's accumulated frustrations, his sense of superiority, his fundamental belief that people like Dorothy existed solely to inconvenience people like him, everything converged into pure, undiluted rage. "You clumsy old bat! Look what you've done!" Dorothy's hand froze, napkins clutched in her weathered fingers. Helen gasped. Maria started moving toward the table, but Sterling's voice cut through the air like a blade. These documents are worth more than you'll see in your entire pathetic life. Do you have any idea what you've cost me? Dorothy straightened slowly, her dignity intact despite the public humiliation. Sir, it was clearly an accident. I'm happy to pay for any cleaning costs. Cleaning costs? Sterling's voice rose to a near shriek. These are irreplaceable legal documents, contracts with Fortune 500 companies, cases that determine whether real Americans keep their jobs or lose them to your kind. The racial undercurrent was unmistakable. Several customers began pulling out phones, sensing something newsworthy developing. Dorothy's voice remained steady. I understand you're upset, but there's no need for that kind of language. Don't tell me what kind of language to use. Sterling stepped closer, towering over Dorothy's seated frame. You people need to learn your place. This is what happens when you let just anyone into decent establishments. Helen Morrison, 78 years old and a retired school principal, found her voice. Young man, you're being completely unreasonable. Accidents happen. Sterling whirled on her. And you can shut your mouth, too. I don't need lectures from welfare queens about reasonable behavior. That's when phones started emerging from pockets throughout the diner. The racial slurs were unmistakable now, impossible to misinterpret or excuse. Maria Santos had heard enough. Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to lower your voice or leave my establishment. Sterling turned his fury on Maria. Your establishment, this grease pit! You should be thanking me for even setting foot in here. People like me are the only reason places like this stay in business. Dorothy slowly stood, her movements deliberate and controlled. At 5'4", she still had to look up at Sterling's 6-foot frame, but something in her posture commanded attention. Sir, I've apologized sincerely for an honest mistake. I've offered to make restitution for any damages, but I will not sit here and allow you to speak to me, my friend, or this lovely business owner with such disrespect. Sterling's face contorted with rage. The idea that this nobody, this insignificant old black woman, would dare stand up to him, would dare lecture him about respect, it was beyond his comprehension. You'll sit down and shut up, or I'll make sure you regret ever leaving whatever government housing project spawned you. Dorothy's voice remained steady as granite. I have every right to be in this restaurant. I've been a customer here longer than you've probably known this neighborhood existed. I'm a taxpayer, a community member, and a human being deserving of basic courtesy. Human beings? Sterling's laugh was ugly, sharp-edged. You're nothing but a drain on society, you and your whole worthless kind. The words hung in the air like poison. Phone cameras captured every syllable. In the corner booth, the well-dressed man had stopped pretending to read his newspaper. Dorothy straightened to her full height, radiating a dignity that made Sterling's expensive clothes look like costume jewelry. Young man, you clearly don't know who you're speaking to. I know exactly who you are, Sterling snarled. You're nobody, a nobody from nowhere with nothing who matters to absolutely no one. The silence that followed was deafening. Then Sterling's hand moved. He grabbed Dorothy's wrist, his fingers digging into her thin skin with enough force to leave marks. You're going to sit down, shut up, and figure out how you're going to pay for what you've destroyed. Dorothy looked down at his hand gripping her wrist, then back up at his face. Sir, you need to let go of me. Now. I'll let go when you show proper respect to your betters. Helen Morrison was on her feet now. Let go of her this instant. Maria Santos moved closer, cell phone in hand. Sir, if you don't release her immediately, I'm calling the police. But Sterling was beyond all reason, beyond any consideration of consequences. The caffeine, the stress, the fundamental rage that came from a lifetime of believing the world owed him deference, it all crystallized into this moment. When Dorothy tried to pull her wrist free, when she looked at him with those calm, unafraid eyes that suggested she'd face down bigger monsters than Richard Sterling, something inside him snapped completely. His free hand came up fast. The slap echoed through the diner like a gunshot. Dorothy's head snapped to the side, coffee-stained napkins scattered to the floor. Her wedding ring, Samuel's ring, worn for 52 years, flew from her finger and rolled across the linoleum, coming to rest against a pair of expensive Italian leather shoes in the corner booth. For a heartbeat, nobody moved. Then chaos erupted. Customers leaped to their feet, phones held high, recording everything. Maria Santos was already dialing 911. Helen Morrison rushed to Dorothy's side, tears streaming down her face. But Dorothy Washington didn't cry. She touched her cheek where Sterling's palm had connected and felt the heat blooming across her dark skin. She looked at Richard Sterling with something that wasn't fear, wasn't anger, wasn't even surprising. It was pity. "You have no idea what you just did," she said quietly. Sterling straightened his tie, his breathing heavy but his satisfaction evident. Another nobody put in their place. Another lesson taught about the natural order of things. He had no idea that in the corner booth, Vincent Washington's most trusted lieutenant was already speed dialing a number that would change everything. The man in the expensive shoes picked up Dorothy's ring, pocketing it carefully. Evidence, perhaps. Or maybe just something to return to the woman his boss loved more than life itself. By the time the first police sirens became audible in the distance, Richard Sterling had exactly 18 hours left of believing he was untouchable. Sergeant Mike Rodriguez arrived at Rosie's diner expecting another routine disturbance call. Instead, he found a dozen phones still recording and an atmosphere thick with tension. Sterling immediately seized control. "Officer, thank God you're here. I was attacked by these people while enjoying a peaceful lunch." He flashed his law credentials with practiced ease. "Richard Sterling, senior partner at Crawford, Sterling and Associates. That woman deliberately destroyed my property and became violent when I requested compensation." Rodriguez surveyed the scene. Every witness wore the same expression, disgust aimed squarely at Sterling. Not typical when someone claims victimhood. "Sir, step back and let me assess the situation." Sterling name-dropped shamelessly. "Detective Captain Morrison is a personal friend. Commissioner Walsh attends my country club. I trust this will be handled appropriately." Dorothy provided her statement with quiet dignity despite her swollen cheek. When asked for emergency contacts, she handed over an elegant business card. "My son Vincent should be notified. Vincent Washington, private consultant." Rodriguez noted the expensive cardstock, the mysterious job title. "What kind of consulting, ma'am?" Dorothy's smile was enigmatic. "Business consulting. He helps people solve problems." Within an hour, grainy cell phone footage hit social media. The hashtag #JusticeForDorothy began trending. Users quickly identified Sterling, posting his law firm's website and recent court victories defending corporations against discrimination lawsuits. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Sterling's law office erupted into crisis mode. Partners convened emergency meetings as clients called with concerns. But Sterling remained confident. "This will blow over. Some people got slapped for being disrespectful. People understand actions have consequences." Meanwhile, Dorothy made a quiet phone call. "Vincent, honey, I had a little trouble at lunch today." The voice changed instantly. Busy businessman replaced by something much more focused. "What kind of trouble, Ma? Are you hurt?" "A misunderstanding with another customer. He got upset about spilled coffee and, well, he struck me." 3 seconds of deadly silence. "He hit you?" "Just a bruised cheek. Police are here, there were witnesses. Thought you should know." "What's his name?" "Richard Sterling, some kind of lawyer." Another silence. Longer this time. "Ma, listen carefully. Don't speak to reporters without me present. Don't sign anything. I'm handling this now." "Vincent, you don't need to get involved." "Ma, absolute finality. Someone put their hands on you. This is business now." Sterling was cited for assault but released. Standard procedure for first-time offenders. He posted on social media that evening, framing himself as the victim of a shakedown attempt and complaining about politically correct overreach. His followers rallied to his defense, sharing their own stories and praising Sterling for standing up to race hustlers. The echo chamber reinforced his confidence. A few weeks of minor controversy, maybe some sensitivity training, and everything would return to normal. Sterling had spent his career understanding power dynamics, knowing which people mattered and which could be safely ignored. He'd calculated that Dorothy Washington fell into the latter category. It was the most expensive miscalculation of his life. While Sterling slept peacefully, certain phone calls were being made across the city. Quiet conversations between people who owed favors, who remembered debts, who understood that Vincent Washington's family was not to be touched. The system was about to work very differently than Richard Sterling expected. Vincent Washington sat in the back room of Torino's, the most exclusive restaurant in the city's financial district. The weekly gathering looked like any other high-powered business dinner. Expensive suits, quiet conversations, the kind of meeting where fortunes were made and destroyed with handshakes. Except these weren't Fortune 500 executives. Vincent commanded the head of the table with quiet authority. To his right sat Tommy the Fish Marconi, who controlled the docks. To his left, Maria DeLuca, who handled the family's legitimate businesses. Around the table, lieutenants, advisors, enforcers, all of them waiting for Vincent's word on territory disputes, profit sharing, and the 100 daily decisions that kept the Washington crime family running smoothly. Vincent Washington wasn't just successful. He was the boss, the man who controlled half the city's underground economy and maintained iron discipline over an organization that stretched from the waterfront to the suburbs. His phone buzzed during discussions about a construction contract. Vincent glanced at the screen. "Ma," and immediately stood. "Excuse me," he said quietly, and the room fell silent. When Vincent Washington took a call from his mother, everything else stopped. He stepped into the adjoining office, closing the door behind him. "Ma? What's wrong?" Dorothy's voice carried through the speaker, measured and calm despite everything. "I had a little trouble at lunch today. A man became upset about some spilled coffee and struck me." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 20 degrees. "He hit you?" Vincent's voice remained controlled, but everyone in the next room could hear the change in tone through the walls. "His name is Richard Sterling, some kind of lawyer." Vincent closed his eyes, processing the information with the methodical precision that had made him the most feared man in 3 states. Someone had put their hands on Dorothy Washington. Someone was about to learn why that was the most dangerous mistake of their life. "Ma, are you hurt? Do you need medical attention?" "Just a bruised cheek, sweetheart. Helen's with me, and the police were very professional." Vincent's mind was already working, calculating responses, measuring consequences. The old Vincent, the one who'd grown up on these streets, who'd earned his position through violence and intimidation, wanted immediate, brutal retribution. But Dorothy had raised him better than that. "Ma, listen to me carefully. Don't speak to any reporters, don't sign anything. And don't worry about this Sterling character, I'll handle everything." "Vincent, honey, you don't need to get involved in this mess." "Ma." The word carried absolute finality. "Someone put their hands on you. This stopped being a mess the moment he made that choice." Vincent ended the call and stood motionless for 30 seconds, staring at his reflection in the office window. The city sprawled below him, his city, where his word was law and his protection meant everything. He opened the door and returned to the dining room. 8 pairs of eyes watched him with the attention of soldiers awaiting orders from their general. "Change of plans," Vincent announced. "Tommy, I need everything you can find on a lawyer named Richard Sterling. Full background, finances, family, enemies, weaknesses. I want it in 2 hours." Tommy nodded, already reaching for his phone. "What kind of lawyer, boss?" "The kind who thinks he can slap my mother and walk away." The reaction was immediate. Chairs scraped back. Hands moved toward concealed weapons. Maria DeLuca's face went pale. "Boss," she said carefully, "just say the word." Vincent held up a hand and the room froze. This was why he commanded absolute loyalty, not just his capacity for violence, but his ability to control it. "We do this right. Ma wants justice, not revenge. We use the system, but we make sure the system works properly." Across town, Richard Sterling was enjoying a celebratory dinner at his country club, regaling fellow members with his version of the day's events. He'd turned the elderly woman into a grasping opportunist, himself into the victim of a shakedown attempt. His audience ate it up. These were his people, wealthy, white, convinced that the world's problems stemmed from others' inability to know their place. Sterling had no idea that his name was currently being researched by some of the most thorough investigators money could buy. People who specialized in finding pressure points, who understood that everyone had secrets worth protecting. Within an hour, Vincent had a complete dossier. Sterling's financial troubles, hidden from his partners but devastating nonetheless. His pattern of discrimination lawsuits always settled quietly out of court. His gambling debts to people who weren't patient about repayment. Most importantly, Sterling owed money to Michael Big Mike Torino, who happened to be Vincent's cousin. The irony was almost poetic. Vincent made his first call to District Attorney Margaret Carter. They'd known each other since childhood. She'd grown up 3 blocks from the Washington house, had attended Dorothy's Sunday school classes for 5 years. "Maggie, it's Vincent. We need to talk." Chen's voice was immediately cautious. "Vincent, I can't discuss ongoing cases with you. It's about my mother." A pause. Carter knew exactly who Dorothy Washington was, what she meant to the neighborhood, to Vincent. "Is she all right?" "Someone assaulted her today. Richard Sterling. I need to know if this case gets proper attention." "Vincent, you know I can't promise special treatment." "I'm not asking for special treatment, Maggie. I'm asking for justice, the kind my mother taught us both to believe in." Chen was quiet for a long moment. She owed her law school scholarship to a recommendation letter Dorothy had written 15 years ago. Dorothy Washington had believed in her when no one else would. "Send me the case file number. I'll review it personally." Vincent's second call went to Police Commissioner Frank Walsh. Another old neighborhood connection, someone who remembered when Dorothy Washington had organized community watches that kept their streets safe. The third call was to Judge Patricia Martinez, who'd received her first legal job through a referral Dorothy had arranged. One by one, Vincent contacted people who owed Dorothy Washington debts of gratitude. Not corruption, something deeper. Something earned through decades of quiet kindness, of believing in people before they believed in themselves. By midnight, Richard Sterling's assault case had been flagged for priority review. Not because of any illegal influence, but because Dorothy Washington had spent 50 years building a community of people who remembered her faith in them. Vincent Washington commanded fear throughout the criminal underworld, but Dorothy Washington commanded something more powerful: respect throughout the legitimate world. Sterling went to sleep confident that his connections would protect him. He had no idea that Dorothy's connections ran deeper, reached higher, and mattered more than his country club memberships and golf partnerships. The most dangerous man in the city was about to teach Richard Sterling the difference between power and influence, between fear and respect, between what money could buy and what character earned. District Attorney Margaret Carter arrived at her office at 6 a.m., 2 hours before her usual schedule. The Sterling case file sat on her desk, flagged for immediate review. She'd known this moment would come eventually, the day when her professional obligations intersected with personal loyalty to Dorothy Washington. Chen opened the file with the methodical precision that had made her the youngest DA in the city's history. Body cam footage, witness statements, cell phone videos from multiple angles. The evidence was overwhelming, but that wasn't what concerned her. What concerned her was the phone call she'd received at midnight from Vincent Washington. She'd grown up 3 blocks from the Washington house, had attended Dorothy's Sunday school classes every week for 5 years. When Carter's father lost his job at the factory, Dorothy had quietly arranged tutoring sessions, had written the recommendation letter that secured Carter's full scholarship to law school. Dorothy Washington had believed in her before she believed in herself. Now Vincent was calling in that debt, not through threats or intimidation, but through something much more powerful: the simple request that justice be served properly. Chen picked up her phone and dialed Assistant DA James Rodriguez. "James, I need you in my office immediately. Bring the Sterling assault case." Rodriguez arrived within 20 minutes, coffee in hand and questions in his eyes. "Ma'am, this seems like a straightforward assault case. Why the priority review?" "Because Richard Sterling has a pattern," Carter said, spreading documents across her conference table. "I've been reviewing his history. 3 previous incidents all settled out of court, all involving minority plaintiffs." She handed Rodriguez a thick folder. "Employment discrimination lawsuits where Sterling represented the corporate defendants. Hostile workplace complaints that mysteriously disappeared. Sexual harassment cases that never made it to trial." Rodriguez whistled low. "He's been using his position to silence victims. And now he's the perpetrator. James, I want you to build this case like it's the most important trial of your career. Because if we don't stop Sterling now, Dorothy Washington won't be his last victim." Chen didn't mention her personal connection to Dorothy. She didn't need to. The evidence spoke for itself. Across town, Police Commissioner Frank Walsh was having a similar conversation with Detective Captain Sarah Morrison. Captain, I want you to personally oversee the Sterling investigation. Full resources, complete transparency, everything by the book. Morrison frowned. Sir, this is a misdemeanor assault. We don't usually assign detective captains to. Richard Sterling assaulted a 72-year-old woman in front of witnesses. Walsh interrupted. This case is going to attract media attention, community scrutiny, and federal oversight if we handle it wrong. I want it handled right. Walsh had his own reasons for personal investment. 20 years ago, when he was a rookie beat cop struggling with PTSD from his military service, Dorothy Washington had organized community support that literally saved his career. She'd connected him with counseling services and had vouched for his character when Internal Affairs was considering disciplinary action. Dorothy Washington had given him a second chance when no one else would. Morrison assembled a team of senior detectives and began re-examining every piece of evidence. The body cam footage revealed Sterling's initial lies to responding officers. The witness statements painted a clear picture of escalating racial harassment. The cell phone videos captured every slur, every threat, every moment of humiliation he'd inflicted on Dorothy. But most damaging was Sterling's own social media activity. His posts from that evening, gloating about putting entitled minorities in their place, bragging about his connections protecting him from consequences. Sterling had documented his own hate crime. Meanwhile, at Crawford, Sterling and Associates, the firm's senior partners were discovering the full scope of their exposure. Managing partner Harrison Crawford sat in an emergency session with the firm's other founding partners, reviewing Sterling's case history with growing horror. "Gentlemen, we have a problem," Crawford announced. "Richard's actions have created liability for the entire firm. Our malpractice insurance won't cover hate crimes. Our corporate clients are already asking questions." Partner Thomas Wakefield pulled up news coverage on his tablet. "The video has 2 million views. The hashtag #Justice for Dorothy is trending nationally. Our biggest client just canceled their retainer. We need to cut Sterling loose immediately," declared partner Elizabeth Hayes. "Issue a statement condemning his actions, announce his suspension pending investigation." But they were already too late. Vincent Washington's people had been busy throughout the night, making phone calls, sharing information, ensuring that Sterling's history became public knowledge. By morning, investigative journalists had Sterling's complete disciplinary record from the State Bar Association. Employment lawyers were coming forward with stories of his harassment tactics. Former clients were describing his discriminatory behavior in depositions and court filings. Sterling's carefully constructed reputation was collapsing in real time. At 10 a.m., Sterling arrived at his office to find security guards waiting with boxes for his personal belongings. "What the hell is this?" he demanded. Crawford stood behind the guards, his expression grim. "Richard, the partners have voted unanimously to terminate your employment effective immediately. Your actions have brought disgrace to this firm and exposed us to lawsuits we can't afford. You can't fire me. I'm a founding partner." "Read your partnership agreement, Richard. The morality clause is quite specific about behavior that damages the firm's reputation." Sterling's face went white. Without the firm's protection, without their resources and connections, he was just another defendant facing serious criminal charges. "Harrison, we've been friends for 20 years. My clients generate millions in revenue. Your former clients, they've all requested new representation." Crawford handed him a letter. "You have 1 hour to clear out your office. Security will escort you from the building." As Sterling packed his personal items, his assistant Jennifer received dozens of calls from reporters, from civil rights organizations, from federal investigators who'd taken interest in his pattern of discrimination. Sterling's phone buzzed with notifications. Clients terminating their contracts, colleagues distancing themselves, country club members expressing concern about his membership status. The social isolation was swift and complete. But Vincent Washington wasn't finished. That afternoon, Sterling received a visit from FBI agent Patricia Valdez, who'd been investigating civil rights violations in corporate America. "Mr. Sterling, we'd like to discuss your representation of Megalith Corporation in their discrimination lawsuit, specifically your strategies for silencing minority plaintiffs." Sterling's lawyer advised him to invoke his Fifth Amendment rights, but the damage was done. The federal investigation that Dorothy's assault had triggered was expanding into Sterling's entire career. Judge Patricia Martinez, reviewing the case for preliminary hearing, noted Sterling's history of using legal technicalities to escape accountability. This time, she would ensure every procedural requirement was met, every piece of evidence properly admitted. Sterling had built his career on exploiting the system's weaknesses. Now that same system, guided by people who owed Dorothy Washington their success, was closing every loophole he might have used. By evening, Sterling sat alone in his penthouse apartment, watching news coverage of his downfall. The elderly black woman he'd dismissed as nobody had somehow triggered a coordinated response that destroyed everything he'd spent decades building. He still didn't understand how it had happened so quickly, so thoroughly. Sterling had no idea that Dorothy Washington had spent 50 years investing in people's futures, believing in their potential, helping them achieve success through education, opportunity, and simple human decency. Vincent Washington commanded fear through violence and intimidation, but Dorothy Washington commanded something infinitely more powerful: love, loyalty, and gratitude from hundreds of people whose lives she'd touched. Sterling thought he'd slapped some random old woman. He'd actually struck the mother figure of half the city's power structure: judges, prosecutors, police officials, community leaders who remembered Dorothy's faith in them when no one else cared. The investigation was proceeding with unprecedented speed and thoroughness, not because of corruption or outside pressure, but because people who owed Dorothy Washington everything were finally able to repay their debts by ensuring justice was served properly. Sterling's world was crumbling exactly the way Vincent Washington had planned, through the system with dignity, using the very principles of justice that Dorothy had spent her life teaching. The most dangerous man in the city was keeping his promise to his mother. Sterling would face consequences through legal channels surrounded by people who remembered Dorothy's kindness and Vincent's patience. But patience had its limits, and Richard Sterling was about to learn that some mistakes could never be undone, no matter how many connections you thought you had. And he was going to do it exactly the way his mother had taught him, through the system, with dignity, using the very principles of justice that Dorothy Washington had spent her life upholding. Sterling thought he'd slapped some nobody. He'd actually struck the mother of the most powerful man in the city, a man who'd learned that true strength came not from violence, but from knowing when and how to use every tool at your disposal. The countdown to Richard Sterling's destruction had officially begun. The courtroom was packed beyond capacity. Media crews lined the hallway outside Judge Patricia Martinez's courtroom, their cameras capturing every person who entered. Civil rights leaders sat alongside neighborhood residents. Federal observers monitored from the back rows. The case of the people versus. Richard Sterling had become a symbol of something much larger than one moment of violence. Sterling entered through a side door, flanked by his new attorney, a public defender named Michael Carter, who'd drawn the short straw when Sterling's original legal team abandoned him. Gone was the expensive suit, replaced by an ill-fitting jacket from a discount store. Gone was the arrogant swagger, replaced by the hunched shoulders of a man who'd lost everything. In the gallery's front row sat Dorothy Washington, her Sunday dress pressed and perfect, her posture radiating the quiet dignity that had sustained her through 72 years of life's challenges. Beside her, Helen Morrison held her hand in silent support. And in the back corner, almost invisible among the crowd, Vincent Washington watched with the cold patience of a predator who'd cornered his prey. Sterling's eyes found Vincent's across the courtroom. For the first time since this nightmare began, he truly understood who Dorothy Washington's son was. The expensive suit, the carefully groomed appearance, the way courthouse security nodded respectfully as he passed, this wasn't just some successful businessman. This was the man who owned half the city, who commanded fear and respect in equal measure, whose protection Dorothy had enjoyed without even knowing it existed. Judge Martinez called the court to order. The People versus Richard Sterling, case number 2024 CR 4751, charges of assault in the third degree, aggravated harassment, and civil rights violations. Assistant DA James Rodriguez stood to present the prosecution's case. Over the past 3 weeks, he'd built an argument that went far beyond a single moment of violence. Your Honor, the defendant didn't just slap Dorothy Washington. He perpetrated a hate crime against a pillar of our community, using racial slurs and physical violence to terrorize an elderly woman whose only offense was existing in a space he believed belonged exclusively to people like him. Rodriguez presented the evidence methodically. Body cam footage showing Sterling's lies to police. Cell phone videos capturing every racial slur, witness testimony describing the escalating harassment, Sterling's own social media posts gloating about the incident. But the most damaging evidence came from Sterling's own history. The defendant has a pattern of targeting minorities for harassment and discrimination. 3 previous incidents, multiple employment lawsuits where he silenced victims through intimidation and legal technicalities. This wasn't an isolated moment of anger. This was the culmination of a career built on systematic racism. Sterling's public defender, overwhelmed and under-resourced, could only offer weak objections. Your Honor, my client has no prior criminal convictions. This was an isolated incident during a stressful day. Judge Martinez's expression remained neutral, but everyone in the courtroom could feel her controlled anger. She'd reviewed Sterling's complete file and had seen the pattern of behavior that law enforcement had somehow missed for decades. Mr. Carter, your client's lack of criminal convictions doesn't negate 20 years of civil rights violations. Please call your first witness. Sterling took the stand in his own defense, a decision his attorney had strongly advised against. But Sterling's arrogance remained intact despite everything that had happened to him. Your Honor, I was the victim that day. Mrs. Washington destroyed valuable legal documents, then became hostile when I requested reasonable compensation. I may have reacted more strongly than necessary, but I was provoked. Rodriguez cross-examined with surgical precision. Mr. Sterling, you testified that Mrs. Washington became hostile. Can you explain to the court what you mean by hostile? She became argumentative, refused to take responsibility for her actions. Did she raise her voice at you? Well, no, but did she threaten you in any way? Not exactly, but her attitude was... Mr. Sterling, yes or no, did Dorothy Washington do anything aggressive toward you before you struck her? Sterling's pause lasted too long. She was being disrespectful. Disrespectful how? By existing in a restaurant you considered above her station? The objection came too late. The damage was done. Rodriguez continued. Mr. Sterling, you used the phrase, you people, multiple times during this incident. What did you mean by you people? I meant people who don't take responsibility for their actions. Is that why you called Mrs. Washington a ghetto rat and welfare queen? Because she wouldn't take responsibility? Sterling's composure cracked completely. I was angry. She cost me thousands of dollars in ruined documents. Documents that were sitting unprotected on a restaurant table that you had spilled coffee on before Mrs. Washington even approached. The timeline didn't work in Sterling's favor. Security cameras had captured him knocking over his own coffee cup in anger before Dorothy had even stood up. When Dorothy took the stand, the courtroom fell silent. Rodriguez guided her through the events gently, respectfully, allowing her dignity to shine through every answer. Mrs. Washington, can you describe what happened when you accidentally bumped Mr. Sterling's table? I immediately apologized and offered to help clean up the spill. I also offered to pay for any damages to his papers. How did Mr. Sterling respond? He became very angry and started using language that was inappropriate. Can you be more specific about the language he used? Dorothy's voice remained steady. He called me ghetto trash and said people like me didn't belong in decent establishments. How did that make you feel? For the first time, Dorothy's composure wavered slightly. It reminded me of a time when such language was more common, when people felt free to express hatred openly. I thought we'd move beyond that as a society. Rodriguez's final question devastated Sterling's defense. Mrs. Washington, why didn't you simply leave the restaurant when Mr. Sterling became hostile? Dorothy straightened in her chair. Because I had every right to be there. I've been a customer at Rosie's for 15 years. I've lived in this neighborhood for 45 years. I've contributed to this community as a teacher, a volunteer, and a neighbor. I wasn't going to be driven away by someone's hatred. The courtroom erupted in applause. Judge Martinez gavelled for order, but her own eyes were damp. Sterling's character witnesses were devastating in their absence. Former colleagues refused to testify. Country club members suddenly couldn't remember his contributions. Even his own family maintained conspicuous silence. In contrast, Dorothy's supporters filled the witness list. Former students who'd become doctors and lawyers, neighbors whose children she'd tutored, community leaders who'd benefited from her decades of service. Maria Santos testified about Dorothy's role in saving the diner during economic hardship. Helen Morrison described their friendship and Dorothy's gentle character. Dr. Patricia Williams, now a federal judge, spoke about the scholarship recommendation Dorothy had written 20 years earlier. The pattern became clear. Dorothy Washington had spent her life lifting others up, while Richard Sterling had spent his career tearing others down. Judge Martinez retired for deliberation after closing arguments. The wait lasted less than 30 minutes. After reviewing all evidence and testimony, this court finds the defendant guilty on all charges. Mr. Sterling, your actions represent not just a single moment of violence, but a pattern of behavior that has no place in our society. Sterling's face went white as the judge continued. You are sentenced to 18 months in federal prison, followed by 2 years of supervised probation. You will also complete 500 hours of community service at minority-serving organizations, attend mandatory sensitivity training, and pay full restitution to Mrs. Washington for medical expenses and emotional distress. But Judge Martinez wasn't finished. Additionally, this court is recommending that the State Bar Association review your license to practice law. Your actions demonstrate a fundamental lack of character incompatible with the legal profession. Sterling's legs nearly gave out. His career was over. His reputation was destroyed. His freedom was forfeit. As the bailiff approached with handcuffs, Sterling's eyes found Vincent Washington one final time. Vincent didn't smile, didn't nod, didn't acknowledge Sterling's existence. He simply stood and walked toward his mother, the man who'd orchestrated Sterling's complete destruction without lifting a finger himself. Dorothy hugged her son gently as they left the courtroom together. Thank you for handling this properly, Vincent. You taught me well, Ma. Justice matters more than revenge. Outside the courthouse, District Attorney Carter held a press conference announcing new protocols for hate crime prosecution. Police Commissioner Walsh unveiled enhanced training programs for officers responding to bias incidents. Judge Martinez's sentencing had created precedent that would protect future victims. The case had accomplished exactly what Vincent Washington intended: Sterling's destruction through legitimate channels, while strengthening the system that protected people like his mother. Richard Sterling was led away in handcuffs, his transformation from predator to prey complete. The man who'd believed his position made him untouchable had learned that some people command protection through love rather than fear. And Dorothy Washington returned to her weekly lunch at Rosie's Diner, where she was treated like the queen she'd always been, while her son ensured that no one would ever make Sterling's mistake again. 6 months later, Dorothy Washington walked into Rosie's Diner for her weekly lunch with Helen. The same booth waited, the same warm greetings from Maria and regular customers. But everything had fundamentally changed since Richard Sterling's sentencing. The city had taken notice of Dorothy's grace under pressure. Mayor Patricia Johnson presented her with the key to the city at a ceremony attended by hundreds. The citation read, "For demonstrating that dignity and courage triumph over prejudice." Dorothy used her platform wisely, partnering with the DA's office to establish the Dorothy Washington Center for Bias Crime Victims. Federal grants funded the program, while volunteer lawyers, many former students who remembered her kindness, donated thousands of service hours. "It's not about me," Dorothy told reporters. "It's about ensuring no one faces what I faced alone." The Sterling case became required reading in law schools nationwide. Police departments updated bias crime protocols. The State Bar Association implemented new character requirements for attorney licensing. Meanwhile, Sterling discovered justice from the receiving end. At the East Side Community Center, he reported for court-mandated community service every Saturday. His supervisor, Mrs. Angela Rodriguez, was a 78-year-old retired teacher who took no nonsense. "You'll be serving meals to seniors who look exactly like the woman you assaulted," she told him that first morning. "Learn their names, stories, and dignity." The work was humbling. Elderly black women served neighbors, organized clothing drives, tutored grandchildren with the same patience Dorothy had shown countless students. Slowly, Sterling began understanding what he'd tried to destroy. Pillars of community who'd survived decades of prejudice with humanity intact. Vincent Washington watched these developments with quiet satisfaction. His mother's dignity had accomplished what violence never could: genuine change, systemic reform, justice that prevented future victims rather than simply punishing past crimes. "Ma," he said during Sunday dinner, "you changed more lives through 15 minutes of grace than I've changed through 15 years of intimidation." Dorothy smiled, patting his hand. "Violence wins battles, Vincent, but only love wins wars." At Rosie's diner, Maria had framed the newspaper clipping from Dorothy's award ceremony. It hung beside pictures of neighborhood kids who'd achieved success, families celebrating milestones, community members who'd found refuge in this sanctuary of acceptance. A young law student approached Dorothy's table. "Mrs. Washington, I'm Sarah Carter, studying civil rights law. You inspired me to fight hatred with dignity." Dorothy gestured for Sarah to sit. "Tell me about your family, dear." As Sarah shared her story, immigrant parents, financial struggles, dreams of protecting others, Dorothy saw herself reflected in another young person determined to make the world more just. This was the real victory, not Sterling's imprisonment, but the inspiration Dorothy's courage provided to the next generation who refused to accept injustice as inevitable. The Sterling case had created lasting change. Systems reformed, precedents established, hope renewed. Dorothy continued doing what she'd always done, believing in people's capacity for growth, fighting injustice with grace, proving that the most revolutionary act is refusing to let hatred make you hateful. Have you ever stood up for someone who couldn't stand up for themselves? Have you ever discovered that quiet people hold unexpected power? Share your story in the comments. Like if you believe dignity defeats hatred. Subscribe for more stories where justice emerges from unlikely sources, where ordinary people accomplish extraordinary things by choosing hope over hate. Because you never know who might be watching when you choose kindness, whose life might change forever because you did what's right instead of what's easy.
The story you heard today wasn't cleaned up. It was told exactly as it happened. At Black Voices Uncut, we believe that's the only way truth can live. If you felt something, hit like, comment, and your reaction, and subscribe. Every week, we bring you voices that refuse to be silenced.